My name is Alara, and I'm 38 years old, and the letters I wrote for love ended up becoming my final act of revenge. I never planned to be a writer of confessions, but silence can eat at a person. When my husband, Aaron Caldwell, died suddenly 2 years ago, his family made sure I disappeared from their world as neatly as they wished I'd never been in it. They were the kind of people who smiled for photographs and whispered cruelty behind crystal glasses. From the beginning, I was an outsider. The Caldwells were old money, polished to the bone. While I was a schoolteacher with nothing to my name but kindness and patience qualities. Margaret Caldwell, Aaron's mother, considered unimpressive. After the funeral, she made it clear that my place in their family had died with her son. My key to the estate was revoked. My calls went unanswered. His siblings, Julian and Claire, stopped responding to messages altogether. It was as if I'd been erased. I remember the first morning I woke up alone in our apartment after they took everything, the furniture, the car, even Aaron's clothes from the closet. They said I had no claim. I sat in the empty room, surrounded by silence so loud it made my head ache. That was when I started writing. At first, the letters were small acts of survival words to keep myself from falling apart. One to Margaret, one to Julian, one to Claire. I didn't write to beg or accuse. I wrote to remember who I was before they broke me. Each letter held truths they refused to see: how Margaret controlled Aaron's every decision, how Julian used charm to hide his lies, how Claire feigned kindness while twisting the knife. I wrote at night, by lamplight, the pen trembling in my hand. Some lines were angry, some sad, others almost tender. Despite everything, I didn't hate them then. I just wanted them to know how deeply their cruelty had hurt, how it had destroyed the man they claimed to love. When I finished, I sealed each letter carefully, writing their names in steady ink. I mailed them on the same day, placing them in the blue postbox down the street. It felt like a small victory, a whisper of truth sent into a world that never listened to me. Then I waited. Days passed. Then weeks. I checked the mailbox every morning, half expecting something, an apology, a response, anything. Nothing came. Finally, I called Claire. She didn't pick up, but I left a message anyway. "I sent you something important," I said. "Please read it." A week later, a text arrived. Just one line. "We received your letters. None of us read them. Stop trying to stir drama." I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, reading that message over and over until the words blurred. They had kept my letters unopened. The realization cut deeper than any insult could. It wasn't just that they ignored me, they'd erased my voice entirely. Everything I'd written, every truth, every confession had been dismissed without a glance. I stopped writing after that. I packed my things, left the city, and moved to a small coastal town where no one knew my name. I taught part-time at a local school, rented a modest apartment above a bakery, and tried to forget the Caldwells. But forgetting people who built their cruelty into you isn't easy. Sometimes I dreamed of Aaron, his laugh, his warmth before his family smothered it out of him. He wasn't perfect, but he'd been mine, and losing him still hurt more than I admitted. In those quiet months by the sea, I often wondered what would have happened if they'd opened my letters. Maybe they'd have understood the truth. Maybe they'd have seen that the woman they despised was the only one who ever truly loved him. But the Caldwells didn't deal in truth. They dealt in image. 3 months after I left, I came home from school to find a message on my answering machine. The voice was calm, formal. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is Mr. Halden, the family's attorney. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late husband, Aaron Caldwell. You are requested to attend the reading of his will next week. Your presence is mandatory." I stood there in my small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The Caldwells had made sure I was erased from their world, so why was I suddenly being summoned back? For a long time, I didn't move. The machine beeped again, signaling the end of the message, and I rewound it, listening twice, then 3 times, making sure I hadn't misheard. Mandatory. It didn't make sense. There was nothing left of Aaron's estate for me. No house, no car, no savings. His family had made certain of that. Still, I couldn't ignore the strange pull in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was the universe giving me one last chance to speak the truth they'd refused to hear. I didn't know it yet, but that letter reading the one they'd all ignored wasn't over. They had kept my words sealed in silence. But soon, the silence would break, and the voices they'd worked so hard to suppress would finally be heard. And when that day came, every word I had written would matter more than any of us could have imagined. When the lawyer said my presence was mandatory at the reading of the will, I almost laughed. It sounded absurd, as if the family that had erased me suddenly wanted me in their gilded circle again. I played the message a few more times that night. The voice was steady, polite, and strangely insistent. You are required to attend. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. For days I debated whether to go. My rational mind told me to ignore it, to stay far away from that mansion and its ghosts. But curiosity has a way of pulling you back into places you swore you'd never return to. I needed closure, or maybe just proof that I no longer belonged there. The following week I ironed a plain black dress, the same one I'd worn at Aaron's funeral, and drove back to the Caldwell estate. The drive felt longer than I remembered, every curve of the road tightening the knot in my chest. When the gates came into view, I almost turned back. They still stood tall and imposing, the same iron bars that once made me feel trapped inside their world. I pressed the call button at the intercom. After a brief pause, a voice crackled through. State your name. Elara Caldwell, I said. There was a silence. Then the gate opened with a heavy metallic groan, and I drove through. The mansion loomed ahead, white columns, spotless windows, and that same hollow beauty that had always made me uneasy. I parked near the circular fountain, where the water still spilled endlessly, indifferent to grief or time. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and polished wood. The family was already gathered in the parlor when I arrived. Margaret Caldwell sat in her usual chair, posture flawless, pearls gleaming against her neck. Her gaze met mine cold, assessing, unchanged. Ah, she said, her tone clipped. You came. I was told it was required, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Julian was slouched on the couch beside her, scrolling through his phone, while Claire stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, pretending not to stare. Mr. Halden, the lawyer, stood near a mahogany table stacked with folders. He turned when I entered and gave me a brief, professional smile. Mrs. Caldwell, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. The word Mrs. made Margaret's lips tighten. I sat in a chair opposite her, careful to keep a polite distance. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Mr. Halden cleared his throat. We'll begin. As per the late Mr. Aaron Caldwell's instructions, this meeting is to include all immediate family members and his surviving spouse. Margaret's fingers curled slightly at the word spouse, but she said nothing. The reading started as expected. The estate, the mansion, the investments, the company shares all divided neatly between Margaret and her two remaining children. The Caldwell's fortune stayed intact, as if Aaron's death had been just another formality. I sat quietly, waiting for it to end, already feeling foolish for showing up. But then, as Mr. Halden turned a page, his tone shifted slightly. And now, he said, we come to a personal provision requested by Mr. Caldwell. Margaret frowned. Personal provision? Yes, he said. One concerning his wife. Every eye turned to me, my stomach twisted. Mr. Halden continued, his expression neutral but careful. Before his passing, Mr. Caldwell entrusted me with several sealed letters, to be opened and read aloud only in the presence of his immediate family. The letters were written by Mrs. Elara Caldwell. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Letters? Yes, Mrs. Caldwell, he said. These letters were given to me by Aaron personally. He indicated they were written by his wife prior to his death, and must be read publicly at this meeting, as part of his final request. I felt my breath catch. The letters. My letters. The ones they'd kept unopened. Claire's face drained of color. Julian's phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Margaret spoke first, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. Those letters were nothing but per Mr. Caldwell's written instructions. Mr. Halden interrupted. I am legally obligated to read them in full." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick bundle of envelopes, still sealed, still bearing the same handwriting I'd scrawled in grief months ago. I stared at them, stunned. I remembered every word, every night I'd sat crying at the desk, pressing those envelopes shut with trembling hands. I'd sent them into silence, never imagining they would return like this, a voice resurrected from my pain. Julian scoffed under his breath. He can't be serious. But Mr. Halden was already slicing open the first envelope with a paper knife. The faint sound of tearing paper filled the silence. I felt frozen, torn between dread and disbelief. The words inside those letters weren't meant to be a spectacle. They were raw, personal fragments of my heartbreak, my anger, my truth. And yet, as the lawyer unfolded the first sheet and began to read, I realized this was no longer about me. It was about the truth finally finding its way out in a room that had once swallowed it whole. Miss Halden's voice was steady as he began to read the first lines. To Margaret, you always told me silence was the mark of dignity. I learned it was the mask of cruelty. The sound of my own words echoed through the parlor, calm yet cutting. Margaret stiffened. Claire looked at her mother, wide-eyed. Julian leaned forward slightly, his jaw tight. I sat motionless, my pulse hammering in my throat. It was surreal, hearing my voice fill that room not through my lips, but through the voice of law and truth. The family that had silenced me was finally being forced to listen. And as Mr. Halden's voice carried on, I knew there was no stopping it now. They had kept my letters unopened, but Aaron had made sure they'd hear every single word. The moment Mr. Halden said he would read my letters aloud, the air in the room changed. It was as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees. No one moved. The ticking of the clock grew louder, each second cutting through the silence like a metronome of dread. Margaret's face was the first to shift, that perfect composure cracking just slightly. Her hand gripped the armrest of her chair, the pearls around her neck trembling faintly. "This is inappropriate," she said, voice clipped. "Those letters were private. They were never meant to be read here." The lawyer didn't look up. "Mrs. Caldwell, your son's instructions were explicit. These letters are to be read publicly, in the presence of his immediate family. His words take precedence." Julian muttered something under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Claire stood near the fireplace, arms folded tightly, her knuckles white. I stayed seated, my body tense, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word echoing off the high ceiling. "To Margaret," he read, "you once told me that kindness was weakness, that appearances matter more than truth. I believed you for a long time until your son stopped smiling." Margaret's head jerked slightly. I watched her eyes flick toward me, sharp and accusing, as if I'd just set fire to her immaculate home. "Mr. Halden continued, you taught Aaron to hide his pain because it made you uncomfortable. You turned his love into a performance. And when I tried to love him honestly, you called me unworthy." The words hit the room like glass breaking. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. "I am writing this because I spent years apologizing for existing. You made me feel like an intruder in my own marriage. But I was the one who stayed when the rest of you only judged." Margaret's composure faltered completely now. She shifted in her chair, clutching a handkerchief that had appeared from nowhere. "When Aaron died, you looked at me like I'd failed you, like grief wasn't something I was allowed to feel. But you never understood that he loved me. Not the image you built for him. You wanted a perfect son, not a happy one." The lawyer paused briefly, glancing toward me as if to ask silently whether I wanted him to stop. I shook my head. My throat was too tight to speak, but my eyes said enough. He continued. "If you ever read this, I hope you realize that your silence destroyed more than your son's marriage. It destroyed his peace. And one day, when you wonder why none of your children can look you in the eye, remember, this control is not love." By the time the lawyer finished the letter, Margaret's eyes glistened, though she tried to hide it. The room stayed still. Even the clock seemed to hesitate between ticks. Julian was the first to break the silence. "This is disgusting," he snapped. "Aaron never wanted this. He'd be ashamed of you." I looked up at him slowly. "You think he didn't know what his mother did?" Julian's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had no slick response. Claire, still standing by the fireplace, whispered, He made you write these?" I shook my head. "No. I wrote them when no one would listen." The lawyer cleared his throat again. "There are additional letters, Mrs. Caldwell. The next one is addressed to Mr. Julian Caldwell." Julian's posture stiffened. "You've got to be kidding me." Margaret turned sharply to him. "Don't react. That's what she wants." But the lawyer was already slicing open the next envelope. The sound of paper tearing cut through their words like a blade. As he unfolded the pages, the weight of the room thickened. Julian tried to hide behind nonchalance, leaning back on the couch and stretching his arms behind his head, but I saw his leg bouncing, his composure cracking. The lawyer began reading the opening line. "Julian, arrogance isn't confidence, and cruelty isn't strength. You've confused the two for most of your life." Julian sat up straight. "This is a joke." But the lawyer ignored him. "You told Aaron that I married him for money. You told his mother that I was manipulating him. You said those things knowing they would eat at him until he doubted everything good in his life." Julian's face flushed. "That's a lie. Mr. Haldon continued calmly. "I forgave you back then because I thought you were protecting your family. Now I see it was pride. You needed someone to blame for your failures, and I was convenient. But one day, you'll learn that lies told long enough become cages you can't escape." I kept my eyes on the floor, feeling the heat of Julian's glare burning toward me. "I know about the missing company funds, Julian," the letter went on, "and I know the reason you pushed Aaron to sign those documents before his death. Greed doesn't just ruin fortunes, it ruins souls." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "This is slander. Sit down," Margaret hissed, her voice sharp. "You're making it worse." He stared at her, then at me, his jaw tight, eyes filled with something between rage and humiliation. But he sat back down, his hands shaking. The lawyer folded the letter neatly and set it aside. "That concludes the second reading." No one spoke. The tension was unbearable, raw, suffocating. For a long moment, all I could hear was the wind outside brushing against the windows. Then Claire finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "There's one for me, isn't there?" "Yes, Mr. Haldon said, picking up the third envelope. "There is." She didn't move as he cut it open. I watched her, the sister who had once smiled at me through false kindness, the one who had told me to accept my place at the edge of their family table. Her face was pale now, but she didn't look away. As the lawyer unfolded the letter, she closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing for impact. And as his voice filled the air again, reading the first words, "Claire, I once thought you were my only ally." I saw her expression falter, her mask cracking. The room went utterly still again. No one dared to interrupt. The Caldwells, who had silenced me for years, were now trapped in a room with my voice, and there was nowhere left for them to hide. Julian leaned back in his chair, smirking, pretending the lawyer's voice didn't rattle him. But his hand kept twitching near his tie, his thumb brushing the edge over and over. That was how I knew he was nervous. Julian Caldwell was never still when he was cornered. Mr. Haldon began reading again, his tone even and unhurried, letting every word slice through the pretense in that room. "Julian, arrogance has always been your shield. You use charm to cover the rot beneath it, and you mistake fear for respect." Julian chuckled dryly. "That's enough, Mr. Caldwell," the lawyer interrupted. "Your brother's will obligates me to read each letter in its entirety." Julian's jaw flexed. But he didn't say another word. The lawyer continued. "I stayed quiet because I thought silence would keep the peace. But peace built on fear isn't peace, it's control. You laughed at Aaron's kindness, called it weakness, and made him doubt the very things that made him good. Margaret shifted in her chair, her pearls catching the light. Julian looked at her briefly, seeking support, but she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. The lawyer turned a page and kept reading. You stole from your father's company, Julian. You told yourself it was temporary just until things turned around. But I saw the bank records, the missing transfers. You used Aaron's signature when he was too sick to notice. You made him complicit without his consent. Julian's chair scraped the floor as he stood. That's a lie. She's lying! I didn't move. You know it isn't, I said quietly. He pointed at me, trembling with anger. You don't get to sit there and act innocent. You're the reason he's gone. You filled his head with doubts, turned him against all of us. Mr. Halden raised a hand calmly. Mr. Caldwell, please sit. If you continue interrupting, I'll have to end the reading and reconvene under legal supervision. The authority in his tone worked. Julian sat back down, breathing hard through his nose. The lawyer's voice didn't waver. When Aaron confronted you about the missing funds, you promised to fix it. Instead, you blamed me. You told him I was manipulating him, that I wanted control. He believed you for a time. That lie cost us the last peace we could have had together. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I hadn't known Aaron had confronted him. You never understood your brother. He didn't want to compete with you, he only wanted your approval. But you never gave it because if you had, you might have had to see him as your equal. Julian's expression flickered the first hint of something breaking. I forgive you, the letter said. But one day you'll have to live with the knowledge that your pride buried more than just a company's balance sheet. It buried a brother's heart. The lawyer set the paper down. Silence filled the space where excuses used to live. Julian looked at me not with anger this time, but something that almost resembled shame. He blinked once, hard, then turned his gaze toward the window. Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was sharp but trembling. Aaron wouldn't have wanted this humiliation aired in front of strangers. No. He wanted truth. There's a difference. She looked away, her jaw tightening. Claire stood, pacing near the fireplace. You both need to stop, she said. This is tearing what's left of our family apart. Julian laughed bitterly. What family, Claire? The one that always pretended I was perfect until it was convenient to blame me? You did this to yourself, she snapped. And you didn't? He shot back. You spent your whole life cozying up to whoever had the most power first, Mom, then Dad, then Aaron. You're just mad Alara didn't play along. She flinched at that. But I stayed quiet. I'd written my truth already, I didn't need to argue it. The lawyer waited for the shouting to subside before speaking again. There's more, he said softly. A final note from this letter. Julian groaned. Of course there is. The lawyer read. Julian, if you're hearing this, it means Aaron wanted you to. He told me before he died that he loved you despite everything. He wanted you to know that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's courage. He forgave you long before I ever could. The words hung in the air. Julian's face changed again, the anger draining out of him, replaced by something hollow. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once thrown cruel words like knives, and now had nothing to hold on to. Mr. Halden folded the letter carefully and set it aside. That concludes the second reading, he said quietly. Margaret stood abruptly. This is enough. We don't need to listen to any more of this slander. The lawyer remained composed. I'm afraid there is one more letter. It's addressed to Miss Claire Caldwell. Claire froze. For the first time, she didn't have a retort ready. She looked at me not with hatred, but with something else. Fear, maybe, Julian muttered under his breath. Good luck. She ignored him and nodded stiffly to the lawyer. Go ahead. As he sliced open the third envelope, the air seemed to thicken again. I could see Claire's pulse flutter at her throat, her shoulders squared like someone bracing for a blow. The lawyer began. Claire, I once thought you were the only one who saw me, the only one who cared to understand. But you didn't want to understand me. You wanted to manage me. Claire's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. You told me once that honesty ruins families. You were wrong. Silence does. And you've been silent about things that destroyed more than just me. Her eyes flickered to her mother, then to Julian. Neither of them looked back. You were the one who convinced Aaron to change his will. You said it was best for the family, but what you meant was best for you. I know because he told me, Margaret gasped softly. Claire? Claire's face drained of color. The lawyer continued, unflinching. You may not see it now, but betrayal disguised as protection is still betrayal. I hope one day you'll understand what loyalty really means. When the lawyer stopped reading, no one moved. Claire sank slowly into her chair, eyes glossy but dry, as though the tears refused to come. I watched them all, the perfect family unraveling one truth at a time. The room was a graveyard of secrets now, and every word I'd written was a shovel digging them up. For the first time since Aaron's death, I felt something close to peace. Not victory, just peace. Because they were finally hearing me, whether they wanted to or not. And it was only the beginning. Claire pretended, calm, chin lifted, arms folded, but I could see her hands trembling. She always tried to look composed, even when the truth cornered her. Mr. Halden cleared his throat softly before continuing. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint rustle of the letter as he turned the page. Claire, he read. You were the only one who ever pretended to understand me. You smiled when the others sneered, offered comfort when they turned away. But even your kindness came with strings attached. Claire blinked rapidly, but said nothing. You told me once that we were alike, that you knew what it felt like to be trapped by expectations. You said you wanted peace in this family. But peace built on deceit doesn't last. Julian smirked faintly, but his mother silenced him with a sharp look. The lawyer went on, steady and unflinching. You told Aaron I was planning to leave him. You said I was only waiting for the inheritance to clear. You wanted him to question my love because you were jealous of it. You couldn't stand that he trusted me more than he trusted you. Claire's breath hitched. That's not true, she whispered, barely audible. Mr. Halden didn't pause. You convinced him to rewrite his will. You told him it was just a precaution, that it would protect his family. But you knew what you were doing. You wanted to erase me completely to make sure my name disappeared the moment he was gone. Margaret inhaled sharply. Claire, is that true? Claire didn't look at her. Her jaw trembled, her eyes fixed on the table. You said you did it for him, but you did it for yourself. You couldn't stand losing control of the story. But here's the thing about stories, the truth always waits for its moment to be heard. Julian muttered under his breath. Guess your moment's now. Claire turned to him, her voice sharp. Shut up, Julian. Mr. Halden continued. Unfazed. When Aaron found out what you'd done, he was heartbroken. He told me the night before he died. He said you betrayed him in the cruelest way by using his love for his family against him. A low, broken sound escaped Claire's throat. He told you that? She asked, looking directly at me. I nodded once. He did. Her lips parted as if to speak again, but she stopped, pressing a trembling hand against her mouth. The lawyer read the final lines of the letter. I forgive you, Claire. Because I know you're not evil, just afraid. Afraid of being unseen, unheard, unloved. But you don't have to destroy others to feel whole. The world is wide enough for both love and truth. The letter ended. No one moved. The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing softly against the high ceiling. Claire wiped her eyes quickly, pretending it was nothing. This doesn't change anything, she murmured. Julian laughed bitterly. Doesn't it? Looks like everyone in this room finally knows who you really are. Don't start, she said sharply, her voice cracking. Margaret stood then, her authority faltering for the first time. Enough, she said. We're done with these letters. They're cruel, divisive, and they should have stayed buried. I looked at her and spoke quietly. No, Margaret. What's cruel is what you all did to Aaron. These letters aren't to divide, they're to expose what silence turned into poison. She glared at me. You don't know what family loyalty means. Maybe not, I said. But I know what love means. And love doesn't hide behind manipulation. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but she said nothing. Claire's voice broke through the heavy quiet. He really told you that about the will? Yes, I said softly. He was devastated. He wanted to change it back but didn't have the strength. He asked me to forgive you. Claire's face crumpled. I thought I was protecting him. I thought you were going to take everything. I didn't want his money, I said. I just wanted him. Her shoulders shook as she sank into a chair, her composure finally collapsing. He was the only person who ever made me feel seen, she whispered. And I destroyed that. No one spoke. Even Margaret stayed silent, her expression unreadable. Julian looked uncomfortable, glancing between us, but for once, he didn't interrupt. Mr. Haldon folded the letter neatly and placed it back on the table. That concludes the third reading, he said quietly. There is one final letter remaining. Claire's head lifted slowly. Another one? Yes, the lawyer said. This one isn't addressed to any individual. It's addressed to the Caldwell family as a whole. Margaret frowned. Meaning what, exactly? It means, Mr. Haldon said carefully, that Mr. Caldwell requested I read this letter after the others. He said it was meant to be heard only once, everything else had been revealed. He reached for the last envelope, heavier than the others. Its seal was marked with Aaron's initials, not mine. That small detail sent a chill down my spine. When the lawyer broke the seal, the sound of tearing paper filled the silence again. I braced myself, unsure what I was about to hear. The family looked just as uneasy. Mr. Haldon began. To my family, you've just heard words that you never wanted to face. You've learned truths you tried to bury. But before you turn your anger on my wife, you should know that I read every one of her letters before I died. The room went still. Julian's mouth fell open. What? Margaret's face drained of color. He read them? The lawyer continued. Yes, I read them. Every word. And I asked her to let them go unread. She refused. She wanted peace, not revenge. But after I was gone, I realized something peace without truth isn't peace at all. A shudder went through me. I hadn't known he'd written this. So I made it part of my will. If you're hearing this, it's because I wanted you to. Because I needed you to understand who she really was and who you became when you refused to listen. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, "Oh God." Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his arrogance gone. Claire just stared blankly at the lawyer, tears finally spilling down her face. This family was built on lies. The letter continued. And it's time it breaks free from them. Alara isn't your enemy, she's the only one who told the truth. When the lawyer finished, the silence felt heavier than ever, the kind that follows an earthquake, when everything familiar lies cracked around you. I exhaled slowly, feeling a strange calm settle in my chest. For the first time, I didn't need to speak. Aaron had spoken for me, and his voice was the only one they could never silence again. When the lawyer lifted the last envelope, the air in the room shifted. The earlier anger had drained into something quieter, raw, uncertain. The Caldwells had heard their sins read aloud, but this envelope felt different. It was heavier, sealed with Aaron's handwriting instead of mine. Mr. Haldon looked at me before he began. This final letter, he said, was written by Mrs. Caldwell, but kept by your late husband. According to his written instructions, it is to be read only after the family letters. I froze. I hadn't realized Aaron still had that one. The final letter. The one I never meant for anyone else to see. I had written it months after his death, but before I left the city, my goodbye to him. As the lawyer broke the seal, the sound of paper tearing filled the quiet again. I closed my eyes for a moment, bracing myself. His voice was soft when he began. To my husband, Aaron. Even hearing that line spoken aloud nearly broke me. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm writing it because I don't know what else to do with the pieces of myself you left behind. I loved you more than I could say while you were here. And even now, I still do. But love wasn't enough to save us from the family that surrounded you. The room stayed completely still. I could hear every breath, every quiet swallow. They made me the enemy. I let them. I thought if I stayed silent, they'd stop seeing me as a threat. But silence only made them crueler. I wanted to believe you saw it too, but you were torn between blood and truth. I never blamed you for that. You were trying to survive them, just like I was. Julian shifted slightly, but didn't speak. Margaret's eyes were fixed on the table. The night before you died, you held my hand and said you were sorry. You told me you wished you'd defended me sooner. You said you'd make it right someday. I didn't know what that meant, and I never expected this to be how. The lawyer's voice wavered slightly on that line. I want you to know that I forgive you, Aaron. I forgive all of it, the silence, the hesitation, the way you let them tear pieces off me until I barely recognized myself. Because, even through all that, I knew you loved me. I saw it in the quiet things, the way you touched my shoulder when your mother insulted me, the way you looked at me across crowded rooms when you couldn't speak up. I saw you trying. Margaret's chin quivered. But she said nothing. I forgive them too. Not because they deserve it, but because I can't carry their cruelty anymore. It's too heavy. I need to let it go, or it will eat what's left of me. The lawyer paused, glancing briefly at me. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap. I could feel the tears pressing behind my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. If they ever read this, I hope they understand something. I never wanted their money, or their approval. I only wanted to be seen. I only wanted to matter. Claire lowered her head, wiping at her face quietly. They'll tell themselves stories about me. They'll call me manipulative, dramatic, ungrateful. They'll say I didn't belong. But the truth is, I was the only one brave enough to love you without condition. Julian swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the floor. And if one day they open these letters, if they finally hear me, maybe they'll realize that love is the only inheritance worth keeping. The lawyer's voice grew softer. I hope this reaches you, wherever you are. I hope you've found peace. And I hope you know that, despite everything, I would still choose you. Not the family, not the wealth, just you. He turned the last page slowly. Goodbye, my love. Alara. The silence that followed felt like a tide pulling everything down with it. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Margaret was the first to break. She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, tears falling silently onto her lap. It was the first time I had ever seen her cry. Julian looked pale, hollowed out by something he couldn't name. Claire sat perfectly still, eyes red, lips pressed together as if holding back an apology. Mr. Halden folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table between us. That concludes the final reading, he said quietly. No one said a word. The letters had taken everything, the lies, the distance, the pride, and left only truth behind. Margaret looked at me then. Really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. He kept that letter? She whispered. Yes, I said softly. He did. She nodded once, her gaze lowering. He loved you. I know. Julian ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. I didn't think any of this was real. It's all real, I said. Every word. Claire reached for a tissue, her voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix what's gone, I said gently. But you can stop pretending it didn't happen. She nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. The lawyer gathered the envelopes and placed them carefully back into his briefcase. Mr. Caldwell left one additional note, he said, glancing at me. A short message, meant for this exact moment. He unfolded a small page and read it aloud. If my family has made it this far, it means they've finally listened. I hope you'll understand that truth was never meant to destroy us, it was meant to free us. Take what's left of me and make peace with it. When the lawyer finished, I felt something inside me loosen. The years of silence, the pain of being erased, it all began to fade. For the first time, I didn't feel like the ghost in their story. I felt like the only one still alive in it. I stood slowly, gathering my coat. "Thank you, Mr. Halden," I said. He nodded. "Your husband wanted your words to matter. I think they did." As I walked toward the door, I glanced back once. The Caldwells sat there, silent, surrounded by everything they'd built, and the truth they'd tried to bury. Aaron had kept my final letter safe so they'd one day hear it. And now, they had. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't justice. It was freedom. And that was enough. When Mr. Halden said there was another letter, one written by Aaron himself, the air thickened again. I thought we were finished. I thought the pain had already reached its peak. But hearing his name, hearing that he had prepared something beyond what we'd just endured, sent a tremor through me that words couldn't hold. The lawyer removed a smaller envelope from the folder. Its paper was aged slightly, cream-colored, folded with care. My name was written across the front in Aaron's familiar handwriting, neat, deliberate, gentle. "This one," said Mr. Halden softly, "was addressed to you, Mrs. Caldwell. But your husband asked that it be read aloud." I didn't speak, my throat was too tight. He opened the letter, smoothed the page, and began. "To my Alara, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to say goodbye properly. I know what these letters mean, and I know what I asked of you. I asked for truth, even when truth hurts. You've always been stronger than I deserved." My heart twisted. His voice echoed in my memory, calm, kind, always careful with his words. "I read every letter you wrote before I died. I read them when you thought no one ever would. You don't know what that did to me. For the first time, I saw my family through your eyes, not through the lens of loyalty or fear, but through love that had been pushed to its breaking point." Margaret looked down, her hand pressed against her lips. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Julian stared at the floor, unmoving. The lawyer continued reading. Voice steady but quiet. "You were right about them, about me. I was weak when I should have been brave. I wanted peace so badly that I let cruelty masquerade as order. I let them decide who you were because it was easier than standing up to them. That's on me, not you." I felt tears slipping down my face before I realized I was crying. I didn't try to stop them. "Mother," the letter said, "if you're hearing this, know that I love you. But love doesn't mean blindness. You crushed the joy out of me trying to make me the man you thought I should be. I spent half my life chasing approval and the other half regretting it." Margaret closed her eyes, whispering something under her breath. "Julian," it went on, "I always envied how sure of yourself you seemed. I see now that arrogance is just another form of fear. You spent your whole life running from Father's shadow, and you made me the mirror for your guilt. I forgive you, but I hope you find something real to live for before it's too late." Julian exhaled hard through his nose, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to look anywhere but at the lawyer. "And Claire," the letter continued, "you were my closest friend before all this. I know you thought you were protecting me. You weren't. You were protecting the family's illusion. You don't have to live under it anymore. Let go of the lies. You're better than them." Claire covered her face with her hands and began to cry silently. "Alara," he wrote finally, "you were the only person who loved me without asking for something in return. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. And I repaid that love with hesitation. You deserved better than my fear." The sound of my breath trembled in the stillness. I could almost hear his voice, low and soft, saying the words himself. "When I realized what my family had done to you, it was already too late to make it right. I told Halden to include your letters in my will because I wanted them to hear you, to really hear you, even if I wasn't there to defend you. I wanted your truth to have a voice louder than their silence." The lawyer paused, blinking, then continued. "You once said love is only real when it's brave. You were brave every day, even when they tried to erase you. I hope this brings you peace. Even if it brings them shame. That wasn't my intention. I only wanted the truth to set you free." Margaret's quiet sob filled the room. I had never heard her cry before. It didn't sound like grief. It sounded like recognition. "I don't expect forgiveness," Aaron's letter said. "I don't expect anyone to understand what drove me to these choices. But I do know this. Alara is not the villain in this story. She is the heart of it. The best of it. The only one who tried to save us from ourselves. The words broke something in all of us. Even the lawyer's voice faltered slightly before he reached the final paragraph. Alara, if you ever doubt yourself again, remember this. You didn't destroy this family. You revealed it. And in doing so, you gave me peace in a way I never had while alive. You gave me truth. And that's love in its purest form. He folded the paper carefully, his hands trembling just enough for everyone to notice. That's the end, he said quietly. No one moved. The stillness wasn't like before, not tense, not angry. It was heavy with something new. Acceptance. Margaret wiped her face slowly, then looked at me. Her voice was faint but clear. He loved you more than any of us understood. I know, I said softly. He just couldn't say it until now. Julian leaned back in his chair, his voice low and rough. I don't know how we come back from this. You don't, I said. You start over. Or you stop pretending. Claire looked up, her eyes swollen. You forgive us after all this? I took a deep breath. I forgave you the day I sent the letters. The rest was up to you. Margaret's gaze fell on the folded pages on the table. He made us listen, she whispered. He made sure we couldn't hide. Yes, I said. That was the only way to make them mean something. The lawyer gathered the documents carefully. Your husband's instructions are fulfilled, he said. There's one more matter. He requested a meeting at the lake house tomorrow morning for anyone who wishes to attend. There's a final note there, left for Mrs. Caldwell. I nodded slowly. The lake house, the place where we'd once spent summer weekends laughing before everything fell apart. No one spoke as we left the room. Outside, the sky had turned gray, heavy with rain. I stood by my car, looking back at the mansion, the place that had stolen years from me, now hollowed out by truth. Aaron's words still echoed in my mind. You didn't destroy this family, you revealed it. He'd given me the only thing I'd ever asked for, not wealth, not revenge, just to be heard. And tomorrow at the lake house, I would hear him one last time. Driving to the lake house felt like returning to a ghost that had been waiting patiently for me. The road was long, curving through tall pine trees that whispered in the wind. The sky hung low, pale, and washed out, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or clear. I hadn't been here since the summer before Aaron died. Back then, the air had been full of laughter, his and mine, before the weight of his family pulled everything quiet. When the gravel road ended, the lake appeared wide, still, the surface a sheet of dull silver. The house stood at the water's edge, just as I remembered. Cedar siding faded to gray, the porch swing creaking gently in the breeze. Aaron used to fix that swing every year, even when it didn't need fixing. He said he liked the sound. I parked and sat for a long moment, watching the reflection of the clouds move across the water. The car engine ticked as it cooled. I almost didn't want to get out. It felt like walking into a memory that might vanish the second I stepped too close. Inside, everything was preserved. The scent of cedar and old books still clung to the air. Dust floated in the light pouring through the windows. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly outlines of a life paused mid-breath. On the dining table sat a single wooden box with a small brass lock, no key, just a folded note resting on top. My name was written on it in Aaron's familiar hand. I unfolded the note carefully. Alara, I didn't want these words lost. When Halden finishes reading, come here. You'll know what to do. There was no signature. Just that. My hands trembled as I lifted the box. It wasn't heavy, but it carried weight all the same, the kind that presses down on memory. The lock popped open easily. The latch had never worked well. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, each one labeled with a date. The first envelope was marked 2 years before. I opened it. Inside was a letter written by Aaron. His handwriting was steadier then. You're asleep in the chair right now, still holding your book. I should wake you, but you look peaceful. I wish I could freeze this moment before the world starts whispering again. I'm writing this because I know I'll forget to say it tomorrow. I love you, Alara. You make this house feel like home. I folded the letter back carefully, my chest tight. The second envelope was dated 1 year before. I don't know how to stop my mother. Every time I stand up for you, she turns it into proof that you've manipulated me. I hate what this is doing to you. I hate that I'm not strong enough to make it stop. Please don't give up on me. I pressed the letter to my chest. The ink had bled slightly near the end, maybe a tear stain, maybe the lake air. The third envelope was labeled, "The week before." I can't fix everything, but I've changed my will. Not to punish anyone, to tell the truth. If something happens to me, I want you to be protected. I want them to hear you the way I never let them. You deserve that much. My throat closed. He had planned it. Even as his family tightened their hold, he'd been preparing for this, for me to have the last word. At the bottom of the box lay one more envelope. No date. Just a single word written across it. Now. I hesitated before opening it. If you're reading this, then they've finally heard you. I hope it brought you peace, not pain. I know it must have hurt to have your words laid bare like that. But it was the only way to make them understand who you really were. You were never small, Alara. They just needed to make you feel that way to stay powerful. I read slowly, each line heavier than the last. You think you were invisible in that family, but you were the only thing real in it. I kept your letters because they reminded me that truth still lived somewhere in that house. Every time I looked at them, I thought maybe someday I'd be brave enough to let them read them. When I couldn't, I asked Halden to do it for me. It was my way of keeping my promise. I sat down in the chair near the window, the same one where he used to drink coffee in the mornings, and let the silence wrap around me. Outside, the lake rippled faintly under the soft wind. There's one more thing, the letter said. Under the floorboard beneath this table is something for you. It isn't much, just something I should have given you while I was still here. I bent down and ran my fingers along the wood until I found a loose plank. It lifted easily. Beneath it was a small velvet pouch. Inside was my wedding ring, the one I'd thrown into the lake the day they shut me out of the house. He must have dived for it. I stared at it, tears sliding down my cheeks. The ring was scratched and cold, but it still fit when I slipped it back on. For a long time, I sat there, my hand resting on the table, the lake outside turning gold as the sun began to set. It wasn't forgiveness I felt. It wasn't closure either. It was something quieter, like he was finally saying goodbye in a language I could understand. When I stood to leave, I looked back once. The house seemed softer now, lighter somehow, not haunted anymore, just empty in a peaceful way. On my way out, I locked the door, slipped the note back into my pocket, and whispered into the still air, "You kept your promise, Aaron." The breeze off the lake brushed against my hair, cool and tender, as if answering back. Driving away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Some ghosts aren't meant to follow. But I knew I'd return one last time, not for him, but for the person I used to be. And maybe then, I'd finally be ready to let go. 2 days after the reading, I was back in my small apartment by the coast, trying to make sense of everything. The quiet felt heavier now, as if the letters had stirred ghosts that didn't know where to rest. I hadn't planned to speak to any of them again. I thought that chapter was finished. But grief doesn't end with a courtroom or a signature, it lingers in the spaces between words left unsaid. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID stopped me cold. Julian Caldwell. For a long moment I just stared at the screen, unsure whether to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring until it faded into silence. But something deeper, maybe curiosity, maybe the fragile hope that he'd changed, made me pick up. I kept my voice steady. "Hello?" "Alara," Julian said, his tone flat at first, then softer. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." "You're right about that," I said quietly. He exhaled. "I'm not calling to fight, I need to talk. Can we meet?" I hesitated. "Why?" "Because," he said, and his voice broke just slightly. I can't stop hearing his words. There was no trace of arrogance, no smug control. Just exhaustion. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Fine. Tomorrow morning. The cafe near the harbor. 10 o'clock. The next day, I arrived early. The cafe was half empty, filled with the smell of coffee and sea salt. I chose a corner table where I could see the ocean through the window. When Julian walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, his confidence gone. He looked smaller, older. He sat down slowly. "You look different," he said. "I am," I replied. He gave a faint nod. "You probably think I don't deserve to be here." "I don't think about what you deserve," I said. "I just think about the truth." Julian sighed and rubbed his hands together. "I listened to that lawyer, read every word, and I wanted to hate you for it. But the thing is, you didn't say anything that wasn't true." He looked down, his voice barely audible. "I did steal from the company. I lied to Aaron. I made him sign papers when he was too weak to question them. I told myself it was for the family, that I'd fix it before anyone noticed. But it was just greed. And fear." The honesty stunned me. Julian had never been one to confess. His life had always been built on appearances and smooth words. Now, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "I thought if I made him look weak," he continued, "Mother would finally see me as the strong one. I spent my whole life chasing her approval, and when she gave it, it felt hollow. Like a prize I didn't earn." I said nothing, letting him talk. "When you came along," he said, "I saw how he looked at you. It wasn't like anyone else. He loved you in a way that terrified him and me. I told myself you'd ruin him. But the truth is, you made him happy. Happier than I'd ever seen him." His voice cracked on the last words. I folded my hands around my coffee cup, its warmth grounding me. "You could have told him that while he was alive." "I know." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "But I didn't. I let him die thinking I hated him. And maybe I did. A little. Because he was everything I couldn't be. For the first time, I saw not the cruel brother, but a man, hollowed out by guilt." "After the will reading," he went on, "Mother stopped speaking to me. Claire's barely holding it together. It's like the whole house went silent overnight. No shouting, no pretending. Just silence. And it's worse than the lies ever were. I understood that silence. I had lived inside it for years." He looked at me. "How did you survive it?" "I stopped expecting anything from them," I said. "That's how I found peace." Julian nodded slowly, absorbing the words. "I wanted to call and say I'm sorry. Not because I think it fixes anything it doesn't, but because it's the only thing I haven't said that feels honest." I searched his face. "Do you mean it?" He swallowed hard. "Yes, for all of it. For every cruel word. For turning him against you. For calling you things you didn't deserve. You didn't destroy our family. You just told the truth. We did the rest." The quiet between us stretched. Outside, the waves hit the pier, slow and steady. I took a breath. "I forgive you, Julian. But not for you, for me. I need to let go of what all of you took from me." He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "That's fair." We sat there for a long time. Two people bound by a loss neither could undo. When he finally stood, he looked uncertain. "I don't know what happens next," he said. "You start again," I told him. "And this time, tell the truth even when no one wants to hear it." He managed a small, tired smile. "That sounds like something Aaron would have said." "It was," I said. "He just didn't believe it soon enough." Julian hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table. "Mother wanted me to send this to you," he said quietly. "She couldn't bring herself to do it." I looked at it, my name written in Margaret's elegant cursive. "What is it?" He shook his head. "I didn't read it. She just said you'd understand." I didn't open it. "Not yet. Some wounds need silence before they can face words." Julian stepped back from the table. Thank you for meeting me. Goodbye, Julian, I said. He gave a faint nod, then turned and walked away. When he was gone, I stared at the envelope, tracing my fingers over the neat, practiced handwriting. It was almost too perfect, like her entire life. I didn't know if I was ready for whatever was inside, but I knew I would open it, eventually, because this story wasn't finished yet. And somehow, I knew that Margaret Caldwell, the woman who had taught her children to hide behind silence, had saved her sharpest truth for last. Margaret Caldwell's handwriting had always fascinated me. Every loop, every curve, was deliberate, elegant, but sharp, like a blade dressed in lace. The envelope Julian left on the cafe table carried that same precision. My name was written in her perfect script, centered, no smudge, no hesitation. Even her cruelty was organized. I brought it home and set it on the kitchen counter. For hours, I avoided it, moving through the apartment as if the letter might vanish if I didn't look directly at it. I made tea, folded laundry, washed the same cup twice. But it stayed there, waiting. When night came, I finally sat down at the table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I took a deep breath, slid my thumb under the flap, and opened it. Inside was one sheet of cream stationery, her perfume faint but unmistakable lavender and something cold, like rain on marble. Her words were brief, written in that same flawless hand. Some things should have stayed buried, that was all. No greeting, no apology, no signature. Just 7 words that summed up everything she'd ever been. I read them twice, then set the paper down and stared at it. My first instinct was anger, the familiar kind, the one that burned hot and fast. But it faded quickly, replaced by something quieter, pity. Margaret had spent her entire life building walls around her family, her reputation, her heart. The truth wasn't something she could face. It was something she had to bury to keep her world intact. The letters had unearthed too much, and she wasn't capable of looking at the wreckage. So she did what she always did. She hid behind control. I folded the note neatly and placed it back in the envelope. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked to the beach just before sunrise. The air was cool, the horizon painted in faint gold. The sea moved lazily, calm after the week of storms. I held Margaret's letter in my hand and watched the tide inch closer. Some things should have stayed buried, I whispered aloud, repeating her words. Maybe she's right. Then I tore the letter in half, then into smaller pieces, until all that was left were fragments of her perfect handwriting drifting, harmless, meaningless. I let the wind take them. They scattered like dust, some landing in the water, dissolving instantly. I felt lighter. For years, I had let her voice define me the way she said my name, the way she looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out of her family's portrait. But now, her words didn't cut, they couldn't. She'd lost her power the moment truth entered that room. When I got back to the apartment, I opened the small wooden box from the lake house again. The letters Aaron had written to me were still inside, neatly folded. I added Margaret's empty envelope to the bottom, not as a keepsake, but as an ending. As I closed the lid, my gaze fell on the ring I'd found beneath the floorboards, scratched, cold, still a perfect fit. I turned it between my fingers, thinking about how love and pain can live inside the same object. That afternoon, I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious but not cold. Elara? I got a letter from your mother, I said. I figured Julian would deliver it. What did she say? 7 words. Nothing that changes anything. Claire sighed. She hasn't spoken much since that day. She just sits in the garden, staring at the fountain. It's strange seeing her quiet. Maybe she finally ran out of things to control, I said. She'll never admit she's wrong, Claire murmured. Not even to herself. I know. There was a pause. Are you okay? She asked gently. I think I am, I said. For the first time in a long time. She hesitated. Julian told me you forgave him. I did. I'm not sure I deserve the same. Maybe not yet, I said. But you're trying. That's more than she ever did. When we hung up, I realized the weight I'd carried for years had finally started to lift. The Caldwell's world had always revolved around silence, not peace but repression. They used silence as punishment. I was learning to use it as freedom. That evening, I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sky darken over the sea. The air smelled of salt and something new change, maybe. I took out Aaron's final letter again, tracing the faded ink with my fingertips. You didn't destroy this family. You revealed it. He had been right. The truth hadn't ruined anything that wasn't already broken. It had simply made the cracks visible. I stood and placed the letter beside a framed photo of us at the lake, both of us younger, smiling, unaware of the storms to come. Next to it, I set a small card with one of Aaron's favorite lines. Forgiveness isn't surrender, it's release. The words fit perfectly now. Margaret would probably spend the rest of her days surrounded by silence, convincing herself she'd won, but I knew better. The moment she put pen to paper, she admitted what she never could say aloud, that the truth had shaken her, that she was still thinking about me. And that was enough. I blew out the candle on the table, letting the room fade into soft shadow. The sound of the waves outside carried through the open window, steady and familiar. The past wasn't gone, but it had lost its teeth. Margaret's silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was closure. And in the quiet that followed, I finally felt free. I didn't expect to hear from the lawyer again. But a month after Margaret's letter, Mr. Halden called. His tone was different this time, lighter, almost warm. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, I wanted to inform you that Aaron's charitable foundation has officially reopened under new trustees. The board voted to rename it the Alara Foundation for Renewal and Truth. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I gripped the phone tighter, the words barely making sense. They named it after me? Yes, he said. Your husband's original intention was to dedicate the foundation to honesty and rehabilitation programs for people rebuilding their lives after loss. After the will's reading, the trustees felt it only right to align with his final wishes. We're hosting an event next week to relaunch it. You're invited to speak, if you wish. I hesitated. The idea of standing in front of strangers, bearing the Caldwell name again, made my stomach tighten. I don't know if I should, I said. Mrs. Caldwell, he replied gently. Aaron wanted you to have your voice back. This might be the perfect way to use it. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The world outside was bright sunlight glinting off the sea, but inside, I felt a strange stillness. My name. The name they had tried to erase now stood at the heart of something good. Something real. I decided to go. The day of the event was clear and cool. The foundation's headquarters were in the city, in a renovated old library with tall windows and soft light. I hadn't been in a room full of people in years. When I walked in, conversations paused. Reporters, board members, and guests all turned toward me, their faces a mixture of curiosity and respect. I wasn't sure which unnerved me more. Sandra Price, one of the board directors, greeted me with a warm smile. You must be Alara, she said. It's an honor to finally meet you. Aaron spoke about you often in his journals, about how your compassion changed the way he saw the world. I blinked. His journals? Yes, she said softly. He left them to the foundation. They've been our guide through this transition. Hearing that stirred something deep inside me, grief mixed with gratitude. Aaron's voice still shaping the world, even from beyond it. The event began with speeches, formalities about transparency, purpose, community. Then Mr. Halden introduced me. Our final words come from the woman whose truth built the foundation you see today, Mrs. Alara Caldwell. Applause followed, soft but sincere. I walked to the podium, the weight of every year with the Caldwells pressing against my chest, and then, slowly, lifting. 5 years ago, I began. I wrote letters that I never thought anyone would read. I wrote them because I didn't have a voice left. I wrote them out of grief, anger, and love. I thought they would vanish like everything else I had lost. But somehow, those words found their way back. The room was silent, listening. My husband, Aaron, believed in truth even when he was afraid of it. He used to say that honesty is painful only until it's spoken aloud. After that, it becomes freedom. I paused, scanning the faces before me. Some smiled, others wiped their eyes. This foundation isn't about me. It's about what truth can do when it's finally heard. It can heal what silence destroys. It can rebuild what pride ruins. It can turn pain into purpose. My voice didn't shake anymore. I thought my story ended with loss. But it didn't. It began again the moment I stopped hiding from it. And if my name stands for anything now, I hope it stands for the courage to speak no matter who tries to silence you. When I finished, the audience rose in quiet applause. No flashes, no noise, just people standing to honor what the truth had made of me. Afterward, Sandra led me to a display wall near the entrance. There, under glass, were two framed pieces. One was the original mission statement Aaron had written years ago. The other, a small plaque that read, "In honor of Alara Caldwell, whose truth rebuilt what silence destroyed." My breath caught. For years, the Caldwell name had meant cruelty, control, and shame. But seeing it there surrounded by light, by purpose, gave it new meaning. After the ceremony, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. Reporters called my name, but I didn't stop. I wasn't there for publicity. I was there to close a circle. As I walked toward the car, someone called out behind me. "Alara!" I turned. It was Claire. She looked nervous, standing near the building entrance, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "But I needed to. I wanted to tell you that what you said inside, it mattered." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then handed me the flowers. These were Aaron's favorite. "I thought they belonged with you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "I'm trying to change. I can't undo what I did, but I can stop pretending it didn't happen." "That's where it starts," I said. Claire gave a faint, grateful smile. "Mother's not well," she added quietly. "But she's calmer now. The house feels different. Quieter. I think she finally understands. Maybe silence finally taught her something," I said. "Maybe," she agreed. "But I think it's teaching all of us." We stood there a moment longer before she turned to leave. I watched her go, the lilies, heavy in my hands, their scent faint and comforting. When I got home that night, I placed the flowers beside Aaron's framed letter on my mantel. Then I sat by the window, the city lights flickering below like tiny stars. For the first time, the Caldwell name didn't feel like a chain around my neck. It felt like something I'd reclaimed, reshaped through truth, loss, and courage. Aaron had wanted the world to see me, and now it did. But more importantly, I saw myself again. And that was the truest legacy of all. Claire called me a week after the foundation event. Her voice was small but clear, the kind of tone that belongs to someone who has finally stopped pretending. "Alara," she said, "can we talk? In person?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no. Too many meetings with the Caldwells had ended in pain. But something in her voice, fragile, sincere, made me agree. "All right, where?" "Father's garden," she said. "It's quiet there now." The Caldwell estate hadn't been part of my world for years, but curiosity pulled me back. When I drove up the long, familiar driveway, the place looked older. The once proud garden was overgrown, the hedges untended, the fountain dry. It felt like a monument to everything they'd lost. Claire waited near the stone bench beneath the oak tree. She wore no makeup, her hair loose around her shoulders, a rare thing for her. The moment she saw me, she stood, wringing her hands. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't come for her," I said. "I came for you." She nodded, eyes wet. "I know. Saturday." For a moment, the only sound was the wind through the brittle leaves. She looked down at her lap, then said quietly, "I've been reading your letters again. All of them. Over and over." "Why?" "Because I needed to understand why they hurt so much." She swallowed hard. "And now I do. They weren't attacks. They were truths we refused to face. I studied her face. It was thinner, tired, but honest. What changed? Claire took a deep breath. After the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Aaron's voice, that last line, about letting go of the lies. I think I spent my whole life hiding behind other people's expectations. First mother's, then father's, then Aaron's. I thought if I kept everyone happy, I'd finally belong somewhere. And did you? She shook her head. No, I just disappeared. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, and somewhere a bird cried out a lonely sound that suited the moment. I've left the company, she said suddenly. Julian's handling it for now. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I walked into that office, it felt like stepping back into a lie. I nodded slowly. That's a brave thing to do. It doesn't feel brave, she said softly. It feels like starting over with nothing. Sometimes that's the only way to start right. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. I came here to apologize, Alara, properly this time. I was cruel to you. I smiled to your face and betrayed you behind your back. You never deserved that. I stayed silent, letting her words hang between us. She continued. I told myself you didn't fit, that you were too soft for this family, too open. But the truth is, I envied you. You could feel things. You could say what you meant. I was too scared to be that honest. Her voice cracked then. I loved my brother, but I let Mother turn me against him. I let her tell me what love looked like, and it was all control, all pride. I watched her wipe her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. You can't undo the past, Claire, I said gently. But you can stop living in it. She nodded, trying to smile. I'm trying. That's why I'm here. We sat in silence again. The sun slipped lower, painting the garden in pale gold. It looked almost peaceful, stripped of its perfection. Claire spoke. Again, quieter this time. Mother's not well. She has good days and bad. Julian checks on her, but she barely speaks. Sometimes she asks for you. That surprised me. For me? She doesn't say much, just your name sometimes, like she's rehearsing it. I didn't know how to respond. Margaret Caldwell asking for me was something I'd never imagined. Maybe one day I'll visit, I said finally, when I'm ready. Claire smiled faintly. She'd never admit it, but I think she knows you were right, about all of it. We sat quietly as the wind stirred fallen leaves around our feet. After a while, she reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small white envelope. This was Aaron's. I found it in a box of his things after you left the will reading. I think it's meant for you. I stared at it, recognizing his handwriting instantly steady, gentle, familiar. I didn't open it, she said. I thought about it, but it didn't feel right. I took it carefully, my heart tightening. Thank you, I said. Claire stood. I should go. There's a lot I need to face, things I've avoided for too long. You're doing better than you think, I told her. She gave me a small, watery smile. Aaron always said you were the only one who really understood him. I think I understand that now. As she walked away, I looked around the empty garden, the cracked fountain, the fading roses, the once perfect stone paths now scattered with leaves. It all looked like a reflection of their family, beautiful once, but built on silence, now quietly collapsing under its own weight. I sat for a long while, turning the envelope over in my hands. My name was written across it, no title, no flourish, just Alara. When I finally stood to leave, the last of the sunlight was slipping behind the trees. I tucked the letter safely into my coat pocket and walked back to my car. I didn't open it right away. Some words deserve a glum moment, and I wanted to read Aaron's voice when the world was quiet again. As I drove away from the estate, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. The mansion grew smaller behind me, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by it. I felt like I'd left something there, not pain, but history. And for the first time, the past stayed behind me. I didn't open the letter that night. I kept it on my bedside table, next to Aaron's photograph, unable to touch it yet. It felt like holding a heartbeat, fragile, final, alive in memory. I needed silence first. I needed space to breathe before letting his words in again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky outside my window was soft gray, the kind that promises light but doesn't rush it. I made tea, sat by the window, and finally picked up the envelope. His handwriting looked the same as always, calm, patient, deliberate. He'd written my name once, nothing else. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper inside was thick, folded neatly, smelling faintly of cedar and ink, the scent that had followed him everywhere. I unfolded it carefully and began to read. My Alara, the breath caught in my throat. If you're reading this, it means you've made it through everything I couldn't. I asked Claire to keep this for a reason. I wanted it to find you when the noise had faded, when the anger had cooled, and when you were strong enough to see me clearly, not as the man I tried to be, but as the man I was. I pressed the page against my chest, then lowered it again. You once told me that love shouldn't be a war, but that's what I made it. I let my mother turn our marriage into a battlefield and called it loyalty. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet. I see now that silence isn't peace at all, it's surrender. And I surrendered too soon. The tears came slowly, quiet and steady. When you left, I told myself it was for the best. That you'd be safer without the Caldwells. But every night after, I would walk through the house and still hear your laughter in the walls. The silence was louder than your absence. It haunted me. I could picture him writing that sitting at his desk near the library window, pen moving slowly, the weight of guilt pressing on every line. I don't know how much time I had left when I wrote this. I just knew that if I didn't put these words somewhere safe, they'd die with me. I needed you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. I paused, the words blurring through tears. You were right to walk away when you did. You survived what they could not change. You carried truth like a flame, even when it burned you. I admired that more than I ever said. He had always admired from afar his love, quiet but fierce, hidden under layers of fear. I hope you've found peace. I hope the world feels wide again. If you ever doubt yourself, remember this. You were never the problem. You were the cure. You showed me that love and truth are the same thing, both hard, both pure, both worth everything. My hand covered my mouth as I let out a shaky breath. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until that moment. There's something else I wanted you to have. The letter continued. In my study, behind the second shelf, there's a locked drawer. The key is inside this envelope. I looked down. A small bronze key had fallen onto my lap. Inside that drawer, you'll find the papers for the scholarship fund I started in your name. It's small now, but it will grow. It's for people who've been silenced, the ones who need a second chance to find their voice. You gave me mine back. This is my way of returning it. I traced the edge of the key with my finger, overwhelmed. If the foundation continues, I hope they'll fold the scholarship into it. If not, use it however you wish. I trust you to give it purpose. The next lines were written more slowly, the ink darker where the pen must have lingered. You don't owe my family anything. Not forgiveness, not kindness. But if you ever see them trying to change, help them if you can. They don't deserve your grace, but grace was never about deserving. It's about rising above what broke you. I closed my eyes, the truth of that sinking deep. You've carried pain that should never have been yours to bear. I can't take that away. But I can leave you with this, my faith in you. You are everything good that came from this family. You are its redemption. The tears came faster now. When you stand by the water, think of me. Not in grief, but in peace. I'll be there in the quiet, in the reflection, in the way the wind moves across the lake. That's where I'll stay. The final line was simple. I love you, always. Aaron. I folded the letter back carefully, holding it to my heart for a long moment before placing it back inside the envelope. The key glinted faintly in the morning light. Later that day, I drove back to the mansion not out of pain but with purpose. The house was empty when I arrived, the air stale and still. I found his study easily. The second shelf, just as he said, held a small drawer with a tarnished lock. The key fit perfectly. Inside were documents, neatly bound proof of everything he'd built quietly in my name. The scholarship fund, untouched until now, waiting for someone to breathe life into it. There was also a photograph, one I'd never seen. It was of us at the lake house, sitting on the dock, the water calm behind us. He'd written one line on the back, "Where truth and love finally met." I held it for a long time, then tucked it into my coat pocket. When I stepped outside, the air was cool. The first hints of autumn drifting in. I walked to the edge of the garden, where the fountain no longer ran, and looked up at the house that had once been a cage. Aaron's words echoed softly in my mind. "You were never the problem. You were the cure." I smiled, not in sadness but in release. That night, back home, I placed the letter in the same box that held his others. Then I wrote in my journal, just one sentence. "He gave me back my voice, and I'll use it to give others theirs." It felt right. For the first time, his voice and mine were one, and together, they finally sounded like peace. It took me 2 more weeks to decide what to do with the letters. They sat in the wooden box on my table, bound with a faded blue ribbon, waiting. I'd read them all so many times that I could recite most of the words by heart, but I couldn't keep them forever. They weren't just mine anymore. They belonged to something larger, to truth itself, to memory, to healing. The answer came unexpectedly. In a letter from Sandra, the director of the foundation. She wrote, "We're creating an exhibit, a space dedicated to stories of resilience. We want to feature letters and personal writings that show how truth rebuilds lives. Would you consider contributing something?" I read that line again and again. The timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. Maybe this was where Aaron's words and mine were meant to end up. A week later, I drove back to the city, the box resting carefully in the passenger seat beside me. The foundation building looked different this time, full of light, warm and alive with the quiet hum of volunteers and visitors. Inside, Sandra met me in the lobby. Her smile kind but cautious. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," I replied. "But I want to." She led me to a private office on the 2nd floor, where the walls were lined with photographs, faces of people who'd rebuilt their lives through the programs the foundation funded. "Your story inspired this," she said softly, "but it doesn't belong to pain anymore. It belongs to hope." I placed the box on her desk and untied the ribbon. Inside were all the letters, mine, Aaron's, even the last one from Margaret. They lay together, fragile but complete. The paper slightly yellowed, the ink still clear. "I'd like these to stay here," I said. "Not as reminders of what went wrong, but of what can be healed." Sandra nodded. "We'll preserve them carefully. Would you like to include a note?" "Yes." I took a blank sheet of paper and a pen, my hand steady as I wrote. These letters were born from silence, but they ended in truth. They belong to anyone who has ever been unheard and found the courage to speak anyway. Alara Caldwell. When I finished, Sandra read it, smiled, and said, "That's perfect." She left to arrange the archival work, and I stayed in the room alone for a few minutes, staring at the box. So much of my life had been poured into those pages: grief, anger, love, forgiveness. Letting them go felt like setting down the last piece of a heavy burden I'd carried too long. When Sandra returned, she carried a small brass plaque and set it on the box. It read, "The Caldwell Letters, a testament to truth and love." Seeing the name like that, Caldwell no longer felt bitter. It felt reclaimed, reshaped by something honest. As I left the office, Sandra walked me to the staircase. "You know," she said, "we've been thinking about launching a writing program through the Foundation Letter Workshops for survivors and families learning to speak again. Would you consider leading the first one?" I paused, surprised. "Me?" She smiled. "No one understands the power of words better than you do." I thought of Aaron's final letter, of the scholarship fund he'd started, of the way his handwriting had carried me through the darkest nights. Yes, I said finally. I'd like that very much. When I stepped outside, the city air felt different, lighter, alive. People passed by with their own stories, their own invisible letters folded inside them. I walked to the park nearby, sat on a bench under the oak trees, and opened my journal. I wrote the first draft of what would become the opening line of the workshop. Every truth begins with a sentence someone was once too afraid to say. It felt right. It felt like Aaron. As I looked up, I saw a young woman sitting nearby, crying quietly over a notebook. She noticed me watching and quickly wiped her face. I smiled gently. Sometimes writing it down is the only way through, I said. She hesitated, then nodded. That's what I'm trying. I reached into my bag, pulled out one of the foundation's cards, and handed it to her. If you ever need a place to tell your story, come here. It helped me find mine. She took the card and smiled faintly. Thank you. When she walked away, I sat there for a long time. The autumn air cool against my skin. The leaves above rustled softly, a sound that reminded me of the lake of Aaron's promise that he'd be there in the wind, in the quiet, in the places where truth met love. I closed my eyes and listened. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. That evening, as the sun sank behind the city, I stood by the foundation's glass doors and looked back at the building glowing from within. I thought of everything that had led me here, the pain, the loss, the letters that started as cries and became confessions, and then, finally, legacies. Inside those walls, our voices would live on. Not as ghosts, but as guides. I whispered, "We did it, Aaron," before turning away. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. The letters had found their home, not in bitterness, not in sorrow, but in light. And in giving them away, I had finally found mine.